And I'd love to introduce my buddy, Tracy Gapin. He is a board certified urologist, and he's a men's health expert who focuses on providing high performance men with personalized paths to optimizing their own health. And then you might go, hey, why is he on here? And well, not only does we often focus on children and women, sometimes you got to take care of the dudes, but also Dr. Tracy here is a guy who actually had COVID-19 himself. So Tracy, thanks for joining us, and want to learn a lot more about what this thing is like.
Appreciate it, Tom. Glad to be here with you, buddy.
Yeah, man. You're looking like you're on the mends.
I'm feeling a lot better. I tell you what, it's been a rough 6 weeks or so, but I've definitely turned the corner. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. So, before we dive into some of the, what are you doing? Sort of like, what's your background like in terms of the way you think about these things? Because I want to take a moment and dive into like COVID-19 and maybe some of the things you did that are different than a lot of people might have been exposed to. But I think if we hear a little bit about your background and the way you kind of are thinking about health optimization, it'll help us understand why you did some of the things you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So I focus on men's health, obviously. I focus on a comprehensive systems-based approach when I help men optimize their health. And what that means is I look at every system of the body to bring it together as a whole approach. And that started from, in my practice, I see men come in for testosterone. It starts with testosterone. Every guy comes in saying, hey, I think I might have low T, or can I check my T, or how do I get more T, or, it's all about the T. And what I found with these men is when you improve their testosterone, they don't necessarily get better. Right. And so that got me down the rabbit hole many years ago of a systems-based approach of looking at the whole body in a comprehensive manner. And that's kind of how everything started, learning about epigenetics and learning how precision medicine can help us really optimize from within. And that's how everything started. That was maybe like 5 years ago or so. And so I came to this experience with COVID with a very aggressive approach toward optimizing your health, looking at not just testosterone, because testosterone is just one piece of the bigger puzzle, but looking at sleep. Most guys don't sleep well. Looking at stress, most guys have a very poor response to stress, very poor resilience, and they don't know how to manage it. And that leads to high cortisol, which affects hormones. And it affects inflammation, and it has a cascading effect, and it leads to cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and obesity. And there's this amazing balance of everything that has to occur to optimize health. And so I look at nutrition. I look at not just what men eat, but when they eat. I look at their detox pathways, and I look at their activity, their fitness, and obviously their hormones and mindset as well. And I put all this together to create a comprehensive approach to how to optimize their health from a personalized perspective, using genetics and using their personalized genetic blueprint, because each guy is different and there's no one size fits all approach. And so I like to say that I have a very data-driven approach to optimizing men's health that I don't think a lot of people out there are doing. And there's really no one size fits all. And if you don't have a personalized approach, you're really just guessing in many ways.
So how does that translate? So I'm assuming you've done a lot of this with yourself, but how do you take this very personalized approach to an individual's, and this is kind of, I think, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is we all these people we're trying to treat an individual who's reacting differently than the individual in the bed next to them. And then we're blasting it out on social media. So then we're really confused. So how do you take that and then say, hey, I'm at home, I got COVID-19. What do I do for myself? Do you base it on what you knew from before? Do you have to do some shotgunning? And yeah, what was your experience of it? I mean, how did it all happen?
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. I'll touch on that briefly that why is it that some people die? Why do some people get very sick and recover? Why do some people have mild to moderate symptoms like I had? And why do some people have no symptoms at all? Mm-hmm. And we're still trying to figure that out, but that really very strongly demonstrates the fact that there's some personalization here. There's some individual unique aspect of our health that has still not really been fully uncovered to explain why there's such a wide array of responses to this disease. So what do I do, and what do I tell the men who I take care of? There are general recommendations, some of which your previous guests have talked about over the last couple of days, that look at general nutrition recommendations, general sleep and stress recommendations, and those are in some ways applicable to everyone. But then I can take it one step further and really take a data-driven approach and say, well, what do your genetics show about your inflammatory biomarkers, for example? What do your genetics show when we're looking at your glutathione pathways or your superoxide dismutase and other ways of combating an oxidative stress pathway? And so all these different data points we can use to take a very personalized approach. And so I did that for myself as well. So I track my data on a regular basis, and I can use that to implement various changes.
Right. So how did you know, how did you know you had this thing, this COVID-19?
Yeah, it jumped up on me. I'll tell you what, Tom. So I had night sweats for a few nights. Didn't really think much of it. Looking back, that was probably a signal something was wrong. I had a wet pillow when I woke up, but it was a Friday night, and we were at home. The Rugrats were in bed, and we were having our typical Walden crazy Friday night at home watching Netflix. And suddenly, out of nowhere, broke down with shaking chills and body ache and flu-like symptoms, skin hurt to the touch. Very, very acutely. Within a matter of minutes, I went from feeling completely fine to pretty significant issues.
Wow.
Obviously, my first concern was COVID, given the current environment. And so I sent my wife and kids to her mother's house. Quarantine myself.
So you got them out like right away?
What's that?
You got them out right away?
I got them out that next morning. Yeah, the kids were in bed.
Awesome.
So when they woke up, got them out of the house, and was able to quarantine myself. And the acute symptoms resolved within a couple of days. I'd say within 36 to 48 hours, most of the acute symptoms had cleared. I've had a persistent fatigue, this brain fog that has consumed me since then. And finally, in the last week or so, I can actually think clearly. I can actually focus on on work, focus on my family, focus on being a real person again. So it's been tough.
What's that time period been since you felt better to a week ago when your brain started to turn back on?
It was about a month.
Really?
It was about a month for it to clear, yeah. And it got a little better every day. And, there were good days and bad days. So it's been a challenge, yeah. But I just consider myself fortunate. And, you see all the other people who are having much bigger problems than I went through. So I have gratitude that it wasn't worse, but it's definitely been a challenge.
Well, it's interesting because like Jill and I, when we came back from our meeting over in Hawaii, we got back and it seemed just like that, boom. And we were traveling for another conference, and I spiked a fever. I haven't had a fever in like 25, 30 years. And we didn't, and this was before everybody was talking about it. So I just got sick and laid around and then got better. And I'm waiting for my antibody test to find out if I had it, because we both think we did.
Sure.
Honestly, it was so bad. One of the questions that Melanie asked, I think is awesome, man. Like, what about like, how did you clear the brain fog? And are there any particular supplements or treatments that you did that really kind of accelerated this? Or was it just kind of tincture of time?
Yeah, great question. I immediately jumped on peptides, and peptides are something I love talking about. That night, that Friday night, I had already had a supply of peptides in my refrigerator in case this happened. I was already on one of the peptides as a preventive maneuver as well. And so my first action was peptides. And I truly believe that the peptides I used had a massive impact on my recovery. I could make outlandish statements that they may have saved my life. But I don't know if that actually be that dramatic. I really have no way of knowing for sure, but from the science behind them, I think peptides were definitely instrumental.
So for the people who are watching who may not know, what can you give us a synopsis of what peptides are?
Sure. Yeah. So peptides are simply chains of amino acids. So anywhere from 2 to 100 amino acids connected together is called a peptide. And peptides are natural signaling molecules in that your body recognizes these signals already. They're amino acids that your body knows, but they can be manufactured, synthesized, created to have a very specific function. And so there are peptides that are very effective for modulating, augmenting, improving the immune system. There are peptides that are incredible for helping with metabolism and weight loss, and improving, reducing inflammation, improving healing, whether that's
improving sleep.
You know what? There's a great peptide that my wife and I use, and I have almost every one of my clients on. It's called CJC ipamorelin. And
yeah, brother.
Yeah, one of the first benefits of CJC within a day or two is sleep is massively improved with it. And that's through various mechanisms. It increases growth hormone releasing hormone. It increases growth hormone levels, and also does have an effect on IGF-1. And all those have pleiotropic effects where they have an effect on several areas in the body. But they're peptides for losing weight, for building muscle, peptides for gut health, peptides for joint healing and neurodegenerative diseases. And so you can pick a peptide that can have almost any function that you're looking for. And so there are certain peptides that are very specifically used to modulate the immune system.
Right.
And so that for me was really key.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like I always hesitate to say what peptides I'm using. And don't worry, everybody who's asking, we'll repeat them in just a moment here. But because like I do a lot of chronic Lyme and pandas and PANS, and kids don't always inject themselves, and adults sometimes jump on like one of the bigger immune modulatory peptides is thymosin alpha-1. But I find that in the right time, balancing Th1 and Th2, bumping up natural killer cells, T cells, B cell function is really good. And in other times it helps you for 2 days and then you're back to square one because you haven't done foundational healing like your CJC ipamorelin, maybe your BPC150 and whatever. So some of the, I want you to go over the ones that you were just talking about for a moment, but everybody, peptides should be used with a doctor through prescription. So it's through a compounding pharmacy. You can get peptides online. Don't do it is my recommendation. Is you have to work with your doctor on it, but it's good to know what's out there. So CJC and ipamorelin is the one you were talking about. Can you, so what do you think about immune function? Because that's the one you said for sleep, right? What about it? What's your feeling of what it does?
Yeah, so when we're looking at immune function, thymosin alpha-1, the one that you mentioned, is amazing. It's been around for a long time. I think actually over 20 years. It's been used in HIV patients. It's been used in hundreds of clinical trials. And what it does is it increases Treg cell function, increases natural killer cell function. It's been shown to have direct antiviral effects as well. And so it's a great immunomodulating peptide. That's one that I personally was taking before I got infected with coronavirus, which I think probably had something to do with my
because you said like 2-3 days, right? You were better.
Yeah. It was 36, 48 hours tops, and all the acute symptoms were gone. I had a temperature of 100.0, never went above that. So I never had a true fever. And I recovered very quickly. I was back to work within a week doing telemedicine, but nonetheless working. Right. When I could have been in an ICU on a ventilator, without these, I don't know. So TA or thymosin alpha-1 is a great peptide for immune function as a preventative maneuver. It can also be used if you get infected. So I was taking it at a very low dose before I got infected. that night, that Friday night, I immediately massively bumped it up to the
Right.
therapeutic dose. I also add a couple other peptides, which are amazing for their antiviral effect. LL37 is a great one. It does affect viruses from attaching to cells as well as entering cells, as well as it has
Which is kind of interesting because you can use that for gut
yes,
issues, right? And it's a great
yes,
antimicrobial. And I've also screwed people up royally when their gut wasn't ready to be microbialized, if that's the word, with
yeah,
LL37.
yeah,
So, but now that you mention it, that's kind of interesting too, because we're seeing that the ACE2 receptor is really high in the lining of the respiratory tree, but also on the enterocytes, the
gut,
cells in the
gut,
gut lining.
right,
And we
exactly.
talked about that with Elisa last night. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you bring up a great point that I think is worth emphasizing here, in that peptides are not a magic pill. And people will come to me wanting a peptide to cure their ail, or their ill. But in reality, it's the icing on the cake. You need to take care of what you just said, the foundational measures. You need to have a good quality lifestyle when it comes to your nutrition and your stress resilience, and your fitness and staying active, and it all starts with that, with lifestyle. And then the peptides are a great adjunct, or an additive maneuver. But I want to caution people from thinking that that's the cure, and that certainly peptides are not going to cure COVID, but they're going to, with all the other health optimization approaches that I really practice and preach. This is the icing on the cake.
Well, and I think what's really cool, and I really want to highlight for people, is what Tracy is saying is you came into this working to always optimize yourself. One of the tools in your tool pouch, your tool belt, are peptides, but you're also doing the diet, the lifestyle, looking at the genetics. And so it doesn't always necessarily mean you need to have peptides, but they're a tool that, working with your healthcare provider, you can have. And because you happen to be already having a really strong baseline, and you knew what you're doing because you happen to be the doctor prescribing, you could go ahead and do it. But I really like the way because I don't want anybody to miss that little piece where you're like, hey, you know what? I actually was working on all this before. And I like what you said, this is the icing on the cake, but the hard work is the work you're doing yourself, like we've been talking with everyone else.
Absolutely.
So I want to spend what is this like in your family? Because one, you woke up the next day and you kicked your family out, which is, I think, the right thing to do. But but a couple questions. How did it impact the rest of your family? And then I know some people were asking, did you get a positive test? What kind of test did you do? And what have you done subsequently around testing? And
Yeah.
that last part's a
Yeah,
little bit of...
great point. So it's fascinating that my wife never developed any symptoms whatsoever. We were around each other up until that Saturday morning, and she never got any symptoms at all. My kids, they're 4 and 6. They never had any problem either. My mother-in-law, who was around us quite a bit in the week leading up to that, she's 70 years old, and she had no symptoms either. So I don't know if we have great genes. I don't know if it was sheer luck or what it was that they got no symptoms whatsoever. But I was very fortunate that I was the only one, and my recovery was fairly quick. As for testing, this is a fairly interesting aspect of the story. I called the local epidemiologist. He's an infectious disease doctor who's a close friend of mine, and told him the situation, told him that I think I might have COVID and I need to get tested. But this was after I'd already called the health department, and they said there's no local testing unless you're admitted to the hospital. And right. I tried both counties, Sarasota and Manatee counties locally here, and neither one could I get tested. So I went to him as a last resort saying, hey, doc, I need to get tested, so I don't potentially expose my patients to this.
Right.
So I canceled my patients that Monday and went and got tested. And I was able to get a test only because I'm a physician. only because I needed to get tested to find out if I had it so that I don't risk, I need to take care of my patients, but at the same time, I wanted to be safe. So got the test done, canceled patients Tuesday, Wednesday, figure I'll get the test back Wednesday, I'll be fine, and then get back to work Thursday. Well, Tom, I didn't get my test back for 10 days. 10
Yep.
days. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I had to stay quarantined for 10 days until that time that I got the positive test result the following Wednesday. And fortunately, I had stayed home, quarantined throughout that time. I was doing telemedicine with my patients. And this really, ushered in, I really believe, a new era in medicine with telemedicine, because up
Yeah.
until now, it was really thought of kind of this cool tool, but it wasn't really implemented on a wide scale. Now I'd say 2/3 of my practice is telemedicine.
Yep.
Because patients are afraid of coming in the office or they're sick at home or whatever. So during that time, I stayed home, I self-isolated, I practiced telemedicine, and I really had no more acute symptoms other than that fatigue and brain fog.
Yeah, so eventually the PCR test the PCR test came back positive.
Yeah.
Which and to me it's frustrating because here we are, we're trying to we need to test people who really need to get tested because they're sick and hospitalized, but that completely skews all the data.
Right.
Because we're only testing high risk people, so we're missing out on, you could have potentially been missed. I would have not qualified for a test.
Right.
So what happened after, though? I think this is really cool. What happened afterwards? Because I contacted you last week about some additional testing, and it sounds like you're doing you're helping a lot of people out right now.
Yeah. So we are one of the centers throughout the country that are starting a clinical trial doing convalescent serum donor clinical trial where I will be donating serum to infected sick patients in the hospital. So as part of that, I did have to get retested. So I got retested last week. The COVID test did come back negative this time around, which was good to see. I assumed it would be negative, so it was negative. And so now I'm waiting for the antibody test to come back now. And once that comes back, I'll be able to donate and be part of that trial and hopefully save some lives.
Yeah, that is so good. It's just so amazing. Now, a couple people have asked questions, and I don't know. I mean, I know what my thoughts are. I want to know because there's only so much research one person can look through. But have you seen anything about COVID-19 and blood type affecting symptoms? Because I know there's a lot of talk about this from one really poorly done paper, but
I've seen some talk on social media about it, about blood type A. I don't know that there's any solid data on that. I have not seen any really solid science to show why one blood type would potentially get affected more than others.
Yeah. And have you heard about the whole? I mean, again, this is like blood stuff, but there's the whole methemoglobinemia question and. What's your take on that one? And maybe you can explain what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, you bring up a great point. So, initially we were looking at this as a typical systemic inflammatory response and treating it as such. And people were getting put on a ventilator and they were not responding. And what's been fascinating to see that we've learned through this process is that there's a hypoxemic aspect of these patients where they're not oxygenating well, and it has to do with the hemoglobin and how the virus is affecting the hemoglobin's ability to bind to oxygen and deliver it throughout the body. And so that really changes our approach to how we manage this disease. It's fascinating what we've been able to learn. Unfortunately, lives have been lost in the process, but this is not a typical pneumonia type picture.
Yeah, it is totally different. I mean, so from your experience going through this, I mean, a couple people have mentioned in the chat that they currently have COVID-19. Like I said, I mean, I'm almost positive. I've had it. My wife's had it. Maybe that means my daughter. I know Dr. Song was telling us about her
Yeah.
children having it, and maybe her and her husband. I mean, what would you tell somebody going through it? Because it sounds like for you, it was like the symptoms hammered you right away, like out of the blue. And I mean, personally, I was scared shitless. I was traveling and I was so sick. So what do you do?
Yeah.
What's it feel like a human being who has all your doctor knowledge?
It's definitely scary. You're right. It's scary to let your mind wander. I think what is awful is fear. I think what is very detrimental is fear. I think that I don't want to get woo-woo here, but there's certainly power of mindset, and so I think staying focused on what you need to do to optimize your health and stay focused on what's important matters. So number one, sleep. I honestly think, sleep is underlooked. I think that quantity and quality of sleep is massive when it comes to recovery for this. I think eating well. I think micronutrients are important. I know you've talked to a lot of other guests about, vitamin D is significant. I know vitamin A and zinc are very important as well. So when you get the disease, when you are infected and you have symptoms, we don't really know. We don't really have a solid treatment. Obviously, we're still trying to figure that out.
Right.
But I think there are a lot of things that you can do to hopefully mitigate the symptoms and hopefully improve your recovery. And a lot of it is augmenting and improving your immune function.
Awesome. Well, I couldn't have put it better myself, and I love your segue about the mindset woo woo, because that's where we're moving with our next two guests. And Tracy, thank you so much for coming to share your personal experience with all of this, and thank you for donating blood and the serum and all this to help so many other people, both with developing antibody testing and developing the convalescent serum is remarkable. So, I mean, thank you for everything you do. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're on the front lines, and I'm so glad you're recovering too.
You got it, Tom. Hey, thanks so much for doing this. This is fantastic.
All right. We'll talk soon, man.
You got it, Tom.
Everybody, Dr. Tracy Gapin, such an amazing trooper. And so a couple questions popped up about certain types of antibody tests, finger pricks and stuff like that. The bottom line is all of this is new, and it's more and more is coming out every day. So keep an eye on that and look for that. And